Welcome to Law Chat with Girija, my entrepreneur friends. I'm Girija Parka Patel, and I'm a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a businesswoman, a lawyer, and an entrepreneur, just like you. I believe in the power of storytelling and mentorship through stories. Whether 6 months in or 20 years in their journey, entrepreneurs have impactful experiences to share, which are full of mistakes and full of victories. And my goal is to highlight those and to celebrate the diverse narratives and perspectives in the world of entrepreneurship, which inevitably provides motivation, encouragement, and inspiration to our community and to our own journey. So Law Chat's purpose is not just to share the expected conversations about their businesses and journey, but also I want to share and dive deep into their details. Get nosy, get personal, and learn from their pivotal journey and their mistakes, and also, again, their victories. So I'm here to use those moments to inspire and to motivate you on your own journey. And of course, we can't run away from the law. After all, this is Law Chat with Girija. So let's dive in. Hi, everyone. I am so excited for today's Law Chat with Girija. It's such an honor and privilege to have Natalie Franke on Law Chat today. If you don't already know Natalie and all the amazing things that she's done, let me take a moment and introduce her to you. She's an entrepreneur that truly leads with her heart. She's a mom, she's a wife, and she's also the head of community at Honeybook. And she's a mentor, she's a small business champion, and a community builder. And most of all, she is community over competition. So if you haven't heard that, you'll hear it today for sure. Natalie's passion to serve others radiates on her daily life, and I'm filled with gratitude that she's sitting with me here today on Law Chat. So welcome, Natalie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so honored, truly so honored to be here and so excited to connect and chat today.
Yeah, so I think a lot of us know you through Rising Tide Society. And also, if you've been to any Tuesdays Together meeting, that is a branch of the Rising Tide Society. So tell me about your journey. How did you start? Where did you start all this? Where did this thoughts of creating this community and such a big community come from?
So it began when I was a full-time wedding photographer, and that was sort of my toe dip into the water of small business ownership. I had been photographing weddings for a number of years and kind of hit this point in my career where I was checking all the boxes of success and yet felt so unbelievably alone. I felt so incredibly isolated. You know, I would get up in the morning, I would sit in front of a computer, I would hustle until it got dark outside, then I would shut the computer, go to sleep, repeat the process over and over and over again. And ironically enough, I have never felt more connected to that season of my life as I do right now, amidst this current new reality that so many of us are in, and just this what feels like eternal pandemic season. And that's really how I felt, 5 years ago. It felt like that. I felt so isolated and so alone. And I recognized that the only other people that would really understand what I was going through, the only people that could truly empathize with the experience of being an entrepreneur and building a business and feeling that level of responsibility on their shoulders were other small business owners. But there was a huge problem. And that was that within my industry, and especially in the creative space, it felt like we couldn't possibly be community because we were always competing. There was this sense of scarcity in the marketplace that there was never enough to go around. We were always competing for followers, competing for attention online, competing for clients, competing for email subscribers, like you name it, we were competing. And so I recognized that if I was to continue doing this for the rest of my life, if I was going to be a business owner long past this young kind of nuanced season of my 20s, I had to change the way that community worked in my neighborhood. And that's really what I set out to do. So Rising Tide and the community over competition movement as a result was just born from loneliness and a desire to solve that pain point, not for tens of thousands, but for a photographer in a small town on the Chesapeake Bay. That's what it was sort of originated to do. And so it started so simply. I just had a conversation, my husband, myself, and two of our very, very close friends in Annapolis over wine and dinner about how I was feeling. I just opened up. I think it was the wine. But ultimately, it led to that conversation. And from there, it was, okay, well, what if we started getting people together face to face for coffee? What if we could just sit down at a table and connect? And that's where Tuesdays Together was born. It was, let's get together on the second Tuesday of every month literally we come together on Tuesday. We might compete on Monday, we might compete on Wednesday, but Tuesday we are community, and Tuesday we come together. And ultimately, we believe we're community all the time, but it was born from that idea of like, can we get business owners to just try one day a week, one day of the month to really, really come together. And the rest is history. We started in Annapolis with one meeting, and just as a passion project, myself and my 3 co-founders. And then it grew, and other business owners saw these meetups and said, I want one where I live, and I want one where I live. And so volunteers raised their hands to start hosting these in their backyards and in their neighborhoods and in their local coffee shops and around their own kitchen tables. And the Rising Tide Society grew from there. And so we've kind of been on that journey for about 5 years. A lot has changed in those 5 years, a lot of good progress, a lot of good change. I'm very proud of the change and how hard we're working as a community to continue. We call it making waves, but that's really what this movement was all about, is like, how do we make waves and change the way business has been done? And there's still so much work to do. And so I'm really grateful for the journey, but that's where it originated. Truly just a photographer, a couple of us in a small town.
I think those are where all the amazing things originate, in a small town or in a small space. And it's just an idea that becomes so much bigger. So now, how big is the Rising Tide Society now? Like, I know there's a lot of people. How many people are part of this?
Yes. So we have over 70,000 members in total. If you're talking like the widest reaches of the community, we're actually closer to 80,000 than 70,000 at this point. Our local meetups, it really depends. So we have over 400 in total. However, they're all very different. So some of them meet every single month. Some of them have multiple chapters meeting every single month, like Los Angeles is made up of multiple chapters. Others meet, more like sparsely. Some meet only online. We have a creatives and chronically ill chapter, which is phenomenal, and they meet online. We have a military chapter for creatives who are in the military and aren't really tied to a geographic location. So they can't all, meet in one location, but they share an experience. So they're united by that shared experience. And so our groups look very different between all of them. But yeah, that's kind of the wide macro level view. 70,000 plus members, over 400 groups, and a really incredible just collective of leaders. They're the rock stars of all of this, truly. Like, they are the heart and soul. You're nodding your head because I feel like we both know there's some pretty extraordinary leaders that have been a part of the Houston community where you're based. And so LaShanta, I'm talking about you, my love.
Absolutely. LaShanta.
Yes.
She's amazing.
Yes, true. Like, I have to
Shout
give her
out
credit.
to her.
Yep, 100%. She's extraordinary. So the numbers are great, and they sound big and they sound amazing, but it's so important to look past all of that and recognize that the most important impact of community happens on the one-to-one, and it happens in those dining room tables and coffee shops and, in Houston, with someone standing up to say, I want to change the way things are, and I'm going to do it.
I think it's so incredible. I'm actually one of the 70,000+ members of the Rising Tide Society, and then the Tuesdays Together in Houston. And we do have multiple chapters because Houston's just so big. But any chapter, and I've spoken at them as well. I've shared my knowledge with them, but I've also gained so much knowledge through the other speakers that come, and that's what I love about it, because the ones that do come, they're willing to share, and they're willing to really say community over competition, which I think is such a brilliant and making waves in an innovative and a disruptive way in the industry. So it's awesome. And that movement is just, it also brings such a sense of solidarity in the industry, solidarity, and just because anybody can come, but majority of the people that are there are women. So it's like solidarity in women also. And I just think I've been impacted in such a positive way from it. So thank you for that.
I love hearing that. And I love whenever somebody says disrupting, I have a little bit of pride when I hear that, because, I think that really is kind of at the heart of what we set out to do from the beginning. And there is no surprise to anyone listening to this that, for many of the original Rising Tide members that were apart 5 years ago, many of us began in our businesses in a time, in a season when there weren't a lot of women in positions of leadership. I remember when I started as a photographer back in 2007, 2008, I had a mentor who was a man. He was a fantastic photographer in the DC area. And I told him, I was like, I really want to shoot weddings. I really want to be a wedding photographer. And he said to me, well, I've got to be honest with you. There aren't a lot of women that shoot weddings. It's very physically exhausting. A lot of heavy equipment, just women don't really shoot weddings. Like if you want to shoot newborns or families, like go for it. Y'all, this wasn't that long ago. I mean, I know I'm
No,
dating
it
a
wasn't.
little bit. It was 2007, 2008, and he was one of the kind of like formative photographers in DC. I will never forget that moment. He was driving us to a shoot, and I was in the passenger seat of his car when he said it. And we should know better than to tell anyone that they can't do something.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
a lot of us, when told we can't do something, we go into, okay, well, let me prove you wrong. And
Yes,
so I spent a
absolutely.
couple months after that working to prove him wrong and finding all of the top DC wedding photographers that were women and partnering with them and working with them. And one of them is now one of our leaders
Yeah.
in the Maryland area for Rising Tide. So, finding ways to step beyond the way things were. And again, I like allude to the fact that I still think we've got so much work to do as a business community, as an industry. However, I'm proud that there are so many people that share that mindset of we aren't giving up hope because we've seen disruption before. We've seen change before. The world of 2020 in the small business, especially in the creative small business space, looks nothing like it did a decade ago. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Even the fact that we're having this conversation with the technology we're having it on in a global pandemic and we're able to share so freely of our knowledge and our wisdom and our advice, that's different. You used to hold your secrets close to the chest. You
Yeah.
used to fear giving up your knowledge. There was this sense that, oh, don't tell your secrets. Don't share, what you know, because someone else is going to, ruin you as a result. They're going to be too competitive and they're going to tear you down. And we live in a very different place, in a very different industry. And so my hope is that we can continue disrupting and we can continue making those waves and we can continue helping new leaders to rise, because that's ultimately what my role has now become. At one point I was starting and leading the community, and now I really am stepping into a different role of trying to figure out how do I help not rise myself, but help others to rise above where I am today. Like how do I help that to happen? And I think, it's an important part of this process that all
Yeah.
of us are undertaking.
So I'm going to actually touch on that, what you talked about, the gentleman telling you you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I might have the same mindset. You give me a limitation and I'm going to soar beyond it, and you watch me. But a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people don't have that mindset. And sometimes they allow others to limit them, allow others to create boundaries around them. So what would be your advice to those people or those entrepreneurs that are trying to rise above, like how you rose above, but are being told you can't do it because you're X, Y, or Z? And so what is your advice in that moment?
Yes. Okay. So let me frame it in two ways. The first being, I think there's something that has to happen within yourself. And that you can control. And that actually you can control both aspects. But the first begins with self. The second begins, I believe, with your inner circle and your community. And so within yourself, I think it starts by understanding and acknowledging that you are worthy and capable and strong, and affirming yourself in those beliefs. Look, I'm not woo-woo in any way. I'm very science-based and nerdily so. However, I know from studying the brain that our mindset has a tremendous impact on our output and what we do and what we accomplish. And oftentimes we can get in these cycles of starting to absorb and believe those lies that we're being told. So for example, if I was in that cycle and I was truly believing the lies that were being told to me, or sometimes I frame this like the opinions others have about me,
Yeah.
when that mentor would have said that, I would have absorbed that as truth, not as a challenge for my resilience to take over. I would have thought to
Right.
myself, oh, well, he must be right. I'm never going to be able to be a wedding photographer. I shouldn't even try. However, that isn't my internal dialogue. That isn't my self-talk. My self-talk has always been one of, challenging those mentalities, questioning what I'm being taught and told, looking for resources and sources and other leaders and examples that are the antithesis of what I'm being told. Like I like to challenge. I know, surprise. Anyone who's followed me is like, of course you do. I know that. So I like that. So my internal dialogue was different. And so that's the first thing. If you're being told you can't, you need to challenge your internal dialogue to ask, why not me? Why
Yeah.
can't I? Why not? Because unless you do that, you're going to continue that dialogue and continue down that path of becoming what others think you are rather than
Right.
becoming who you are. So that's the first thing. But then the second part I think is equally as important, and that's surrounding yourself with, encouraging, empowering, and inspiring human beings. And that doesn't mean just surrounding yourself with yes people. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about people that challenge you to be better. People that when they would hear, for example, if within my circle, when I told my friends what that mentor had said to me, they got angry. Like they got fired up, Not all of them are Enneagram 8s, but a lot of them are healthy Enneagram 8s. They got passionate. They got angry. How dare he say that to you? Does he not know how much potential you have, how capable you are, how hardworking you are? But also, how sexist is that? Like they called it out. They spoke it out into existence. And that circle was so affirming. That circle pushed me forward. And I think, there is and I wish I knew who said this, but there's a time, it feels like a timeless kind of quote, trope, meme at this point, that you become most like the 5 people you spend your time with, right? Absolutely. We've all heard this. I believe that to be true. And I think especially in those really formative moments, who's speaking to you in those moments can really determine the trajectory of whether you give up or whether you press on. So my advice would be, first, really work on yourself and make sure that you are encouraging that resilience within you. And there's actually really great research on the American Psychological Association in regards to how to build resilience. So if you're like, resilience, what's that? Go there first. Or if you prefer to think of it as grit, Angela Duckworth has an amazing book called Grit. She is a very formative professor at Penn. She's amazing. I also encourage checking that out as well. And that starts within. And then you look to your circle. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Are they the people that are going to be in your corner, are going to, fight for you? And when you've given up on yourself, are they going to be the ones to pick you back up, put you on your feet again, and help move you forward? If you don't have those kinds of people in your corner, I want to encourage you to go out and find them. And let me just add one last thing to that.
Absolutely.
There's going to be somebody out there who is hearing the "you can't" from someone they love dearly. There's going to be somebody out there who has been told, "I don't think you can do it," from a partner, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, in my case, a mentor. And I just want to remind you that not everyone is going to see your vision. And not everyone is even going to be able to see your worth and your potential. And that doesn't mean it's forever. When I was, really just starting in the creative space in photography, I talk about this a little bit on my website and when I do certain interviews, but my family is very analytical, quantitative, and scientific. My mom is a nurse practitioner. My dad's a nuclear scientist. My grandfather was an aeronautical engineer for NASA for his entire career. So my sister's a doctor, a psychiatrist. So everyone's in the sciences. Everyone is science-brained. And when I started falling in love with photography and I told my family, I'm going to go be a photographer, you're laughing because you can imagine. In my family, very much from a young age, it was, you're going to get a degree, you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. And I know a lot of people can relate to that too. So there were people that really doubted. Yes, I know. There are people that really doubted my desire, that didn't see the vision. And I know there are going to be people out there that say, get rid of them. Get rid of those people. You can't. When they are your mom, your sister, your dad, your partner, you can't. So what I want to encourage you to do otherwise is to take those voices, and just like the Instagram mute feature, you're gonna mentally mute those voices, and you're gonna put your head down and you're gonna do the work. And you're gonna prove through your actions and your belief in yourself that you are capable. And let me tell you this, even if you fail, the amount of respect that you will earn very oftentimes from those people that at once, especially in the beginning, doubted you, might surprise you. It took a while, but I eventually convinced everyone else in my family that this was really the path for me, that being a creative was, in the same way that they felt called to medicine or called to engineering, I felt called to be a creative. And that to me was very, very important. And I was going to be the best version of that I could. And so I earned that respect and that trust, and ultimately got a couple of, you know what, when you first told me you were going to be a photographer, you knew how I felt, but I've never been more proud to be proved wrong.
Yeah.
And it was worth that fight. And so I just want to encourage you as well, if you're feeling that discouragement from people in your life, to put that mute feature on for just right now so that you can push forward and you can surround yourself with those voices that affirm your journey. But also, acknowledge that oftentimes I do believe that criticism and that doubt does not come from a place of them not believing in you, but often from those who really love you the most, comes out of fear that the failure could crush you. Yeah. And from their love of you and their fear that if it doesn't work out, they're worried for what that could mean. And so oftentimes it's out of love. So I say, put the mute on, continue moving forward. And you might be surprised at the end of the day that those doubters can become your biggest cheerleaders.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. You said it so beautifully, because that's the thing. Like my kids, I try to teach that to my kids today. I've even told my daughter, if I ever say no to you for something that you are passionate about, don't listen to me. Put me on the side, put me on the sideline. You keep doing you, because it comes from a place of love for the most time, right? From parents or from your relatives. It's coming from a place of love, because exactly, I don't want to see her hurt. I don't want to see her or my son get hurt in any way. And you're so true about that. I also say to my kids, I'm like, if someone says something to you, but you know who you are, you know what you're made of, you know where you come from. Like if someone says your hair is blue, does that make your hair blue? And the answer is no, but you know what your hair color is, so you keep moving forward. And so it's just like that affirmations inside of you, because you need to know who you are. And I know you've gone through a lot in your journey as well, and that was just the beginning of it. I hate to interrupt this awesome conversation, but I have to stop and talk with you about the number one thing I'm asked about by entrepreneurs: contracts. They're vital to any business relationship and to protect your business. But I also know that entrepreneurs, especially when you're starting up, money is tight. But I would never want you to compromise on a strong legal foundation. So enter yourcontractbuddy.com. A website created by me with contract templates created and drafted by me and fellow industry partners. They're ready to use and easy to plug in immediately. And they are not restricted to any specific state. So yourcontractbuddy.com is sponsoring this episode, and you and your listener can get 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. Yes, you heard me right. 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. And now, back to our awesome conversation. You have risen above so many different challenges over and over again. So tell me a little bit about that. And, and I don't know what the timeline was actually when you started Rising Tide versus the other challenges that you faced. And so if you can kind of elaborate on that a little bit more too.
Sure, absolutely. So a couple of years before Rising Tide, although not shared publicly until after Rising Tide, I was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. So in my early 20s, basically discovered that I had a mass in the hormonal center of my brain, which essentially just solidified a lot of the symptoms that I had been experiencing throughout much of my life without any kind of diagnosis, and just thinking, okay, something's just off about me. I don't know. And kind of questioning it. But getting that diagnosis was really an affirmation of, oh, okay, there is a hormonal imbalance in my brain, and there's something happening here that's affecting me in so many ways. And so that diagnosis was a shock, but also I think a really pivotal moment in my life. Yeah. I stopped playing it safe. That diagnosis really put things into perspective. I just finished my book manuscript and writing about this season. I really struggled to kind of pinpoint it, and it felt like a night and day switch. If anyone watches TikTok, there's like a meme that's like, I flipped the switch, and it's like a song where when you flip the switch, people change outfits, or like something totally changes, and it's like not the same scene.
They jump. Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of how my whole life felt. It was like it flipped a switch, and I went from worrying about, basically at that point in my life, I was 21, 22. I think I just turned 22, planning my wedding. And I was spending all my day on Pinterest, stressing about my wedding and the color palette. I mean, think about this, the color palette of my wedding, and stressing about that to, the next day being told you have a tumor in your brain. And one of the most common outcomes of that is complete infertility.
Oh.
And to sit there and go, so I'm maybe never going to have children. And it just, night and day flipped the switch, and that's sort of the secondary part of the story. So diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, I went almost 5 years without sharing it outside of my family and my very, very close friends, to a point where, Rising Tide was created. We were acquired by HoneyBook. I had the opportunity to move to California to work closer with the HoneyBook team as we continued to grow Rising Tide. And moving out to California meant I got a whole new medical team. And when that happened, my neurosurgery team out at UCSF, one of the best teams in the world, took a couple looks at my MRIs over the course of a couple years and said, I think we need to surgically remove this. I think it makes sense long-term for your quality of life. It's not an emergency by any means, but I think we need to do this. And I think we need to do it soon. And so I went from not having to tell anyone about my personal life, and I kept those two worlds, like separation of church and state. It was like Natalie Franke professional, Natalie Franke personal. They're very different, to recognizing that I didn't want the last thing that I shared with my community to be a half truth, which in my mind is a lie. And so I basically came clean about what I had been walking through and my diagnosis. And ultimately, in that same breath, by the way, I'm having brain surgery and I'm going to be on disability for a while, and I'm going to be out. I'm going to be offline. You're not going to see me. You're not going to hear from me. I need time to recover. And so I took that. I took that experience. I took that time. And again, we could talk about that all day, but lessons learned through going through brain surgery, recovering, having some complications, navigating that. And then, the next step after that was combating the infertility diagnosis, which, we did. And we worked through that for a while. And I have a 16-month-old miracle to prove for that and for that journey and for that battle. And I don't take that for granted at all. I don't take the miracle of my son's existence for granted one bit. I mean, I'll share with you now, and I know this is coming out in a couple of weeks, but I'm going through infertility treatment again, and going through it for a second time, especially struggling through it for a second time when medications that would work for anyone else not only don't work for me, but we're injecting at doses that are longer than the recommended by the actual medication just to try to get a single egg. It's like, it's a reminder to me, I think, of just how much of a miracle every single one of us are. Like every single one of you listening to this, you are such a miracle. You are such a miracle from the universe. You are such a gift to this world that, regardless of whether we are successful with fertility treatment over the next couple of months or not, it's just a reaffirmation of my gratitude for what I do have, and just a reminder that all of us are walking through something difficult. That's something difficult. But everyone listening to this is going through something extraordinarily hard or has overcome something extraordinarily difficult. And I think the biggest sort of learning to arise from all of that is, the need for community and the need for one another, and the opportunity that does arise when we are able to be vulnerable, we are able to be honest about what we're walking through, and the power of empathy in those moments when someone is open with us about their journey, about what they're struggling with, and how we can really transform lives simply by being willing to listen and to love and to be empathetic in those difficult seasons.
Yeah, I think it was 2017 because I remember seeing those posts of yours, and I thought you were incredibly courageous to share that, because it's hard. It's hard to share those things. And granted, you were told when you were 21 and, you waited some years, so maybe you had time to think about it and share. And I think it was so incredibly courageous because, as you're working or as you're an entrepreneur, a founder of something, and then all of a sudden you're told that you need to go for surgery, which might debilitate you from working or from doing things that you're just like, this is what I do.
Right.
But I also I know that when we are hit with extreme trauma which we have to take everything in us, pull everything in us and pick ourselves up and rise, perspectives change, and perspectives also make you feel like this is not a big deal. I can do it. And if I can't do it, no big deal, right? Mm-hmm. I also went through some stuff same year in 2017, and I remember I was like, when I come out of this, I'm going to rise like a phoenix. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to let anything stop me, because what is stopping me? My own limits are stopping me. My own brain, the things that I'm telling myself are stopping me. Nobody can stop me unless I allow them to stop me. And I think I see that in you. I see how you are doing things. And even just talking to you today, you get that energy, right? Like that, don't let anything stop you. Like even if it's health, but what anchors you? I know how mindset we can overcome challenges, but when our knees hit that floor and we're just at our wits' end, what is something that anchors you? What is something that picks you up and says, it's okay, I have you? Like you use this as your anchor.
Okay, so I think there are a couple things, but I think first and foremost, my husband has kind of been that anchor, that literal human personification of an anchor for a very, very long time. I was trying to think of how long we've been together. I want to say 14 years, maybe 15 years. I think it's 15. At this point, you stop counting when you get this far along and you forgive each other for making the mistake. So from a human perspective, I think, again, but it goes back to people. I think that love and that connection to people, my family, my mom, very much anchors me. But then in a larger sense as well, I'm very much grounded in a desire to help people and to love people. And it sounds cheesy and there's someone out there rolling their eyes,
Nope.
but look, if you actually know me or look at the legacy I'm working to leave behind, that's where the truth lies. I think that the greatest impact of Rising Tide and the work that we've done lies in the connections of people all across the world that have been made through a simple meeting at a coffee shop. It has nothing to do with followers on Instagram. It has nothing to do with, the number of meetups or the metrics or any of that. It has to do with the fact that two human beings collided in this, world that we live in, this tiny rock in the magnitude of the universe. And that collision, that intersection of two human lives led to an impact that is far greater than Rising Tide itself. And we've seen this happen in relationships, people being able to connect with someone that they never would have met otherwise, mindsets and hearts being changed over a cup of coffee and genuine conversation, or business partnerships started because two people connected at a meetup and realized that they shared values and a vision and wanted to create something together. That's what anchors me. The knowledge that the work that I do every day, it truly matters. It makes an impact. And most importantly, I think for me, that it will outlive me. That the effort I'm putting in and the hard work and picking myself back up, even when I make mistakes and even when I fail and, even when I question, my own abilities as a leader, which is the vulnerable truth I think all leaders feel at one point or another. It's the fact that I acknowledge that this work really matters. And it matters to the human beings that are showing up at these meetups or showed up one time, even 4 years ago. And at that one meeting, they had that one conversation that changed the trajectory of their entire life. That is what this is all about. So I think I'm anchored by love and by people and also by a desire to make an impact and an impact that is my legacy, that outlives
Your legacy.
me.
Yeah. So going back to Rising Tide, I know you were at Honeybook at the time, right? And then also you're creating something that was kind of abnormal to the industry. Did you receive any pushback during that time from anybody or anything? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you crazy? Like, who does that?
It's funny. So in the last couple of months, I have had a couple different types of interviews with like leaders that have now started podcasts and done things, and they were a part of Rising Tide day one. And what's so funny is they will all agree with what I'm about to say. Most of them, I hope, but I think all of them. When we first launched Rising Tide, there was a huge pushback. There was a huge contingent of entrepreneurs and business owners that, really doubted that we could create something where business owners come together and support one another. I remember being told this is naive. No one is possibly going to get together and share their knowledge and expertise. Why would I ever help somebody new in business? If I've been doing this for 10 years, I'm not going to share my knowledge. I learned it the hard way. Why the hell should I tell them? Why should I share it with them? And
Right.
a lot of that kind of animosity early on. There were articles written about why it was a terrible idea, blog posts, people.
Wow.
I mean, you have to understand, it was a big pushback, and there were a lot of anti-community over competition folks. There probably still are. And the truth of the matter is, and I do believe this, not every idea is for every person. And
No.
I'm someone though that I'm a little bit confrontational, avoidant at times when it comes to that stuff. Like if I don't agree, I'm just going to walk away. But not everyone does. A lot of people were very clear that they didn't agree with this idea of businesses supporting other businesses, and that's just not how things are done. And you should learn the hard way, and all of that kind of conversation. So yes, a lot of pushback. However, what's really fascinating is we're at a point now, we're almost in a post community over competition world in some industries where this is the norm, where this idea that you can get together with other creatives or other small businesses or other attorneys and actually talk shop has become the norm. And I've had leaders say to me, people sometimes don't realize how revolutionary this idea was back when it came out. They think it's normal now. And it's of course that's how it is. Of course we do that for one another. Of course it's, accepted to be kind to other business owners. It wasn't. There was a time where it was acceptable to write negative reviews, dishonestly about your competition that was the way it was. I witnessed that happen. People get torn down in Facebook. It was so nasty and so negative. And so I think that, yes, there was a lot of pushback. There's probably still folks that don't agree with the idea today. However, it's been really interesting to see the positive impact that has resulted. The ROI, even if you don't love the fluffy, if you look at the business ROI, community is a competitive advantage.
Right.
Community is actually an asset to your business. So over the last 5 years, that's ultimately what we've seen. We've never faced anything like what we're facing right now in the small business world in terms of this new reality that we're living in and so many businesses are being impacted by. However, that doesn't change the fact that the statistics are against you when you enter a business, right? A lot of businesses fail, especially within the first 3 years, the first 5 years. There are those milestones we all know. And those metrics are against you. But I've always said this, it's very hard to drown when there are 10 people in a lifeboat reaching out their arms to lift you up out of the waves and pull you back to safety.
I love that.
Very hard to drown. And so
I love that.
Yes, for these small businesses, that the proof lies in that ROI and that benefit, not just the fluffy that I love and the emotional and the empathetic, but ultimately in the down to brass tacks, bottom line, P&L statement. Is your business still around 5 years later? And I'm telling you, the people that have invested in relationships, have invested in community, have dug deep roots into the heart of their local areas are the ones that are still standing after the storm. And we're seeing it now, and I'm seeing it in Rising Tide, and I'm seeing it in Honeybook and the way that people are coming together. They're supporting each other through this pandemic. They are fighting for one another. I'm seeing it amidst the civil rights movement that's unfolding across our country again, and seeing how business owners are fighting for other Black business owners. They're saying shop with Black-owned business, shop and support Black-owned business. I'm seeing that and even living that in how we're thinking and operating. How do we put more money into these Black businesses? How do we shift the unfair and lack of equitable dynamics that have existed throughout time to really change the way that our world works and our business works and our community operates and the people who are in leadership and all of that, right? So we're seeing the impact of community. We're seeing the impact of these waves. We're seeing what can really happen when people come together, when they fight for one another and not against one another. And I think that, we've got so much more work to do in respect to that. But I've seen the proof in just the idea of community over competition and the 5 years that have followed the start of Rising Tide and the impacts made by that. And it gives me so much hope for all the other work we still have left to do. And now we really just have to keep doing it.
I agree. So how did you overcome that doubt? Or the negative, the naysayers? How were you it's okay, I'm still going to do it? Or what was your plan of action, the action steps that you took?
Well, I was very new to criticism at that stage. So the start of Rising Tide, really, I went from being really good at shooting weddings and being a wedding photographer in my tiny town. I was like a big fish in a very, very small fishbowl, not even a pond, like a fishbowl, to not quite being equipped to have that many eyes and be in that position of leadership and making those decisions with that much responsibility. And so I failed a lot. I talk about that pretty openly, but made a lot of mistakes, learned very quickly. And I think the biggest thing that I did with the criticism was I listened to it.
Yeah.
And I know that's going to sound counterintuitive to a lot of people out there. And I know there are a lot of gurus that say, don't listen to your haters and turn them off. Unfortunately, I think that, yes, there will always be the criticism that doesn't need to be listened to because it doesn't come from a place of truth. But in my experience, the best decision I think that we made early on was to keep our ears open to that criticism, to not be defensive, to take a step back and say, okay, what is the truth in this? How can we learn from this? How can we improve? To have a mindset that's malleable, that's open to change, open to improvement, open to growth, instead of fear of being wrong, fear of not being perfect, fear of getting it incorrect. Because I think that and this, look, I'm talking about it from a community standpoint, but I know this applies to nearly every aspect of our life.
Every entrepreneur feels those fears.
100%.
Especially when you're starting. Yeah.
Especially when you're starting, especially when you're pivoting, especially when you're trying something new. And in my case, it was, being thrust into a spotlight that I wasn't ready for. I didn't know. I never set out to build. You have to understand, I never set out to build a community of 70,000 people. Yeah. I just wanted to have a coffee meetup in Annapolis, Maryland. That was all I wanted to do, with 3 other people, our co-founders. They're like, can we just fix Annapolis? And, I think that there are a lot of people too that can relate to that in one way or another, a hobby that becomes something so much more, or a dream that then takes on a life of its own. And so my advice with criticism would be, discern the voices you need to listen to, but do not shy away from the criticism.
Yeah.
Do not write it off. Do not try to be perfect or be afraid of acknowledging your imperfections. Instead, look for the truth in that criticism. Look for the feedback that can make you better, and just continue trying to be better, continue trying to evolve. I also think, for a lot of people that can be discouraging. I think being criticized can feel like almost a form of mental or spiritual paralysis. They get frozen, they freeze up. It's like fight, flight, or freeze, and they don't really fight, and they can't really fly away or run away, so they just freeze. And I think, to those folks, I would just encourage you to set aside the belief that you have to be perfect, or the understanding that criticism changes who you are in any way. Like, actually, exactly what you said earlier on in this conversation about how you affirm your children and you affirm who they are. They know who they are. When you know who you are, other people can't tell you who you are. Yeah. Right? You know who you are. And I think that that's very important, because when you get into the space of criticism and welcoming feedback, you must know who you are. And then take that feedback into account in improving the parts of you that need improving, right? The sandpaper to your rough edges, and being welcoming to that, being open to that.
I totally agree with you. I think constructive criticism is essential. It helps us to grow. It helps us to make what might be not actually so good to better, right? And I think, I don't know how people call it thick skin. I wouldn't call it that, but I know some people might call it that. But having a good grounding of who you are, and not taking that criticism personally, but knowing that that person that is also sharing that criticism might be coming from a place where you have no idea where they're coming from. They might be, who knows where they're coming from right now. So it's not a personal thing, especially if they don't know you. It's absolutely not personal. So I think if we're able to separate ourselves a little bit from that, it's easier to digest that criticism than not. And I completely agree with you, though. It's tough sometimes, especially when you are starting, when you're pivoting, when you're launching. And I know right now a lot of people are pivoting. A lot of people are trying new things. And I would also, like you, encourage them to keep moving forward, keep pressing forward. Try the new thing, make a mistake. Because most people have made those mistakes already. Like, those mistakes are common. What we think is uncommon is actually more common than not. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know in the legal industry, it's like that. I feel so fearful initially to make mistakes. Even now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't make a mistake. I'm a lawyer. I can't make a mistake. But this is like such a crazy thought, right? Like, of course I'm going to make a mistake. Like, I'm human.
And we don't want our leaders to be perfect. We don't expect that of them. We don't. We may think we do, and we may think we're being held to that standard of perfection, but we're not. We're actually being held to, I believe, a standard of integrity, which is very different, right? Perfection says, I can't make a mistake. Integrity says, it's okay to make a mistake as long as I'm honest about that mistake. I learn from it and I grow. And that's where, you mentioned, like, we don't always know where someone is coming from or what they've experienced or where that criticism kind of originated. And my response to that is, in order to accept that feedback, sometimes we have to step into the shoes of empathy, and the shoes of empathy say, I may not understand, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to change. I'm going to try to take, myself out of my mindset and step into this person's mindset a little, to be empathetic, to understand where they're coming from, and create that bridge that ultimately cultivates belonging and connection. And that's community speak, but in business, it also connects between, what you're creating, what you're offering, what you're serving, and what the need is, what the pain point is, what people are looking for and actually can benefit from. So if you launch a product, or you launch a course, you create a podcast, and you get negative feedback, like I said, put yourself in their shoes. Is what they're saying coming from their experience and from their place of understanding and their life experience, and can you learn from it? Can you actually adapt or grow or change in order to better serve, in order to better provide to your customers, your clients, or your audience? But I think it comes down to relinquishing those feelings that we have to be perfect, and understanding that the standard is not perfection, but instead I believe it's integrity.
That is mind-blowing. That was so nice. I loved it. Golden nugget that just came out, like, along with all of the other golden nuggets that have come out from you. But that is so, so, so true. It's about integrity, and I love that. Because truly, that's what a leader is made of. Like, we all make mistakes, but owning up to them and learning from them, and having the humility to say, yes, I did it, but this is what I've learned, and this is the game plan now, whatever it is. But I think that is so true. Wow, that was really, really nice. I love that, actually. So I feel like we've talked about a lot. I actually have a list right next to me just to make sure that I touch on everything. And I'm like going through it. I'm like, we have, and you've given such amazing nuggets of knowledge and inspiration. I love chatting with you right now, and I'm still continuing. I'm not closing this yet. But is there anything in between the lines that normally we don't hear about that you want to share with us that would show people how you maybe faced a challenge, or, something that helped you to pivot and this is how you did it? So just to kind of get some insight that's in between the lines.
Oh, I like that question. I think that one of the biggest kind of misconceptions that we talked about perfection and integrity in terms of leadership, but I also think it applies to what we put out there and what we create. And I think creating imperfectly is still better than not creating. Mm-hmm. So I'll go straight to our community efforts. So when we look at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, we had never faced this before, ever. I mean, it's crazy to even look back. It feels like a different universe or a twilight zone, March 4th versus like March 10th, or, the March 1st versus the 15th, two completely different worlds in the United States of America, very, very different realities, and in other countries around the world as well. And, we recognized very, very quickly with Honeybook and Rising Tide that the small business world was not prepared for what was coming. None of us. I mean, how could we be? How could we be prepared for it? And so I think that a lot of people get stuck in this place of, I can't put it out until it's perfect. I can't go out there with my product, my launch, my course, my podcast until every I is dotted, every T is crossed. But sometimes urgency is required. And sometimes we're not going to get a chance tomorrow. Sometimes we've got to shoot our shot when we have it, and we've got to take advantage of what we've got. Or in the case of serving the community, the business owners might not be there if we don't give them what they need today. And so I think, something that really shifted in me over the last 4 to 5, 6 months now is this understanding that you have to be constantly listening to the pain points that people have. So your customers, your clients, those pain points are going to change. The pain points they had March 1st were not the pain points that our community had March 15th. Business as usual was over by March 10th. Done. We still have, we may never go back to any kind of business as usual until this pandemic is over, because the small business economy was so deeply wounded and still continues to be. And so essentially, we had to start creating resources. We had to start releasing, different types of advice, from financial to communications to legal to, in all aspects of our business. And within a matter of hours, our CEO at Honeybook, who I admire so deeply, Azalan, basically told the company, as of right now, every goal that we had has ceased. Our only goal remains to save our members' businesses. That is it.
That's awesome.
That's it. And I'm not kidding you when I say that my community team, which went from being myself and 2 other people, essentially expanded to become the entire company. And in the span of a couple of hours, all of our salespeople were no longer trying to sell you on the product, but instead we're calling our existing members to say, what do you need? What can we do? How can we support you? How can we help you? And just started going down the list and trying to figure out as much intel as we could from the ground to understand what was needed. And so, it was not operating from this place of perfection. Like, our blog posts were getting updated hour by hour. Like, as guidelines were changing, we were changing our instructions and our support. As different things were unfolding, we were trying to launch a webinar, and then, get on an Instagram live, and then create a Facebook live, and then create a printed resource. Like, whatever we could, every team was trying to do the best that they could. Did we get everything perfectly right the first time we launched it? No, probably not. There were a couple things that we needed to update. Did we show up and serve to the best of our ability, even when it meant working midnight and 1 a.m., which many members of my team did for countless nights, and even still some nights are doing as things change? Yes, absolutely. And it just reminded me, I think, ultimately of the ability for all of us to make those quick decisions when needed, and when they're in alignment with the pain, when they're in alignment with what someone needs and the service we're there to provide, or, the product we've created to solve a problem or a pain or whatever it is. And we're in tight alignment with the customer, or in this case, the community. Right. We have the ability to navigate so much more quickly and efficiently, and like a lean machine, and just get things into the hands of those who need it as quickly as possible. And so actually, I haven't really talked about that at all, but that's kind of been our experience. And even now, like, we are 1, 2, 3, 4, over 4 months, 5 months out from when everything happened in my space, especially wedding and events world, where everything kind of came to a screeching halt. And unfortunately, some states are having resurgences and some states are going back on their phase 2. I know. Texas, Arizona, Pennsylvania, even like a lot of states in the last couple of weeks. And I think, even now at Honeybook and Rising Tide, we're not back to business as usual. We're still trying to show up where the pain points lie, and we may not be for a very long time. But the learning there being, I think that we just all need to be constantly looking to serve and constantly listening to the pain and relinquishing that feeling that it has to be perfectly polished. Because let me tell you, if we had waited, and I believe this, if we had waited another 3 weeks to get the perfect graphics designed and to go through our briefs to like create a brief. And we otherwise operate with briefs. Any kind of initiative, we've got a brief. It gets cross-functional eyes on it. Everything that we do is so well orchestrated. There was no time. It was, trusting the people in the seats that they're in, executing as quickly as possible. Literally, I went from not knowing what force majeure was to fully understanding a force majeure clause and having a free template up on our blog to like trying to talk about, if it could even be relevant. And I spoke about it on more webinars, like pulling in different opinions on it. And again, it's like, that's in between the lines. That's what no one gets to hear about or see, but that's kind of like where the sausage is made. And I'm really proud with where the sausage is made and the team that we have.
That's incredible. That is so incredible. And I think what Honeybook did, a lot of other people did too. And it's so commendable to see companies taking social responsibility because a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, we're suffering, we can't help. But in our suffering, when we can help others that suffer, it brings back so much more blessings. I think it does. And like tenfold, it brings back those blessings. I know in the legal industry also, there were areas that all of a sudden, like, we were meeting up totally, outside of the norm, but meeting up, giving each other help, being that support system that we probably never had before. Right. And the legal community is also experiencing a lot of community over competition, by the way, too. Like in the last 3 years, it's like incredible to see it. And because usually it's very competitive and it can be competitive still, but there's a lot of type A people in there. But no, it is so refreshing to see the outpour of love and service for the community. And I think that's what makes it so beautiful, even regardless of the politics, regardless of the science, regardless of anything that's happening, seeing humanity pour out is what gives me chills at the end of the night. Like, I just love it. And I think it's so nice and commendable to see Honeybook being a part of that. Because social responsibility is very key for companies. And I think a lot of times we forget about it.
Absolutely.
So I think that's just so incredible. Yes, thank you so much. So now that we're talking about legal a little bit, so I know that you are super connected to the community. So what are some legal issues that you have seen or that are very common in our creative industry and in the creative community?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. I mean, how much time do we have? I think at a high level though, I know some of the biggest concerns that I see popping up frequently are around intellectual property, or around, copyright when it comes to photography or design, trademarking when it comes to phrasing or business names, especially in spaces where a lot of folks go into business around their personal brand and then find out, oh, someone already trademarked my name. What do I do? Right. So these sorts of, name within a business, these sorts of questions that pop up around sort of like intellectual property. Also, though, business formation, around what type of business should I be? What type of entity makes the most sense for me from a legal perspective? For us with Rising Tide, when we created Rising Tide Society, I mentioned it was a coffee meetup. How do you business, entity a coffee meetup? I don't know. Yeah. And looking back, we just created an LLC at that point in time because that's what we had built before. And again, like, we operate like our members do now. We probably should have talked to somebody. We probably could have turned out to be a nonprofit at the end of the day. I don't regret the route we went by any means. It led us exactly to where we were supposed to be. But that's really what I think I hear a lot of, the intellectual property and then the business entity formation.
Yeah, that's something I hear a lot also. I mean, I was just on a call before this, and it was like a group meetup call that I was in. More like a mastermind group, and this, all these brilliant ideas are coming out. And for me, while I am also in this group creating and launching as an entrepreneur, not as like a lawyer. I'm sitting there, and every time somebody's talking, I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm thinking about the 5 different things that they need to be careful about, or legally they need to protect themselves. And I'm just trying not to like interject in every single conversation, being like, but did you think of this? Did you think of this? But you're right. Like, I think a lot of times entrepreneurs just kind of jump in, and we're not thinking about all the other aspects. Like, I'm a lawyer, so I think about the law, but I don't think about the finances. I don't think about, just how am I going to create this web design? Like, who's going to do this? So these are all the things that come after the fact.
Right.
So yeah, the copyright intellectual property is huge. And for me, the one thing is protect it. If you don't protect it, someone will take it.
Yep.
So we need to protect that as well. So thank you so much. Now I'm just going to kind of like go in and ask you some, usually I talk about disrupting the industry, but you're already doing that. Is there anything else that's on the radar that we should be on the lookout for from you?
Oh, so we are working on a couple different things coming up in the fall. So, or like late summer, early fall. So we every year have done 20 on the Rise, which is our sort of list of rising, creative small business owners in the industry. And this year we are changing the format. And so I just want to highlight to everyone to stay tuned for that. If you love hearing about stories behind the businesses, it's a really great way to discover some new voices and discover incredible talent. So 20 on the Rise is great. And then this, I have a saying that goes, small business, not Saturday, but every day, because Small Business Saturday gets the credit of being the one day every year where we all go and we buy from small business owners. But the reality is we should do it every single day. So I want to put on your radar that coming up this fall, we do our annual gift guide, and it is an extraordinary list of the smallest of small businesses, these independent contractors, individuals, creatives, makers, artists, extraordinary people from the Rising Tide community that have amazing gifts for any holiday that you could possibly celebrate throughout the winter season. So stay tuned for both of those things.
I can't wait for that. I love holiday guides.
I do too.
In fact, if you have it, when I launch this, I'll put it in the show notes as well, and all the other links that we talked about in the show notes as well.
Great.
So yeah, and then I think you mentioned a book also, or is that still?
Yes,
it's still in the works.
It's in the works. We're hoping 2021. So stay tuned potentially for something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, speaking of books, what is your favorite book?
Okay, I get this question a lot and I change it every single time that I'm asked. But for the sake of this conversation, I would say if you liked this conversation, I'd really recommend Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek.
Oh, I like that.
It's good.
I like
that.
It's
a good book.
And what's your favorite magazine or blog?
Ooh, I really haven't looked at a magazine or a blog in a very long time. I don't even think I have looked at oh my gosh, I'm about to embarrass myself. I haven't looked at a blog in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
What I will say is what I am looking most forward to is Michelle Obama's upcoming podcast, which
my gosh, I heard about that today.
I'm freaking out. So anyway, so that'll replace my answer.
What?
My answer is Michelle Obama. Anything Michelle Obama, but her new podcast.
I'm going to add to that actually. So Magnolia, have you ever read the Magnolia magazine by Chip and Joanna Gaines?
I've seen it in Airbnbs. I've never actually opened it. It's so beautiful from the outside.
It's so beautiful from the inside. I mean, the things that they talk about are just so inspiring and motivational. And it's just, I love everything about them. So
I love them.
But I heard about Michelle Obama's podcast this morning. I'm looking frantically. Is it in there? I'm oh, it's not out yet.
I know. I'm so excited.
And then what are your favorite biz tools?
Oh, well, obviously HoneyBook. Shout out to my job. Love HoneyBook. I also love Flowdesk. I am a huge fan of Flowdesk. Yeah. Actually, the CEO of Flowdesk worked with me at HoneyBook for 4 years before going and launching Flowdesk.
Wow.
So we are big supporters of Martha, and Rebecca, who is her co-founder, is head of product, is one of my best friends in the entire world. So I love Flowdesk, awesome. But again, biased because they're my buddies and the godmother of my son. So literally, I'm very biased. HoneyBook and Flowdesk. Additionally to that, I think I would say maybe 2 other platforms. So I really love Teachable for online courses. I think they do a really great job. And then Planoly, which I adore Planoly, and their co-founder Brandy is an extraordinary human being. And I've just been really honored to get to know her over the years.
Yeah.
So that'd be my 4 top roundup.
I love Planoly. I love Planoly. I mean, I couldn't survive without Planoly. Let me put it that way instead.
Yeah, me neither. I couldn't either.
Well, I could keep talking to you, and I've had such an amazing conversation with you. You have just thrown all over the place all these golden nuggets of genius and inspiration. And I'm just so thankful to you. And I'm sure everybody else enjoyed listening to you and your story and your entrepreneurial journey. And so thank you. I'm so grateful for you. How can we find you? Where can we find you?
Yes. So I would say 3 different places. First, Honeybook and also Rising Tide. You can find Honeybook at honeybook.com, Rising Tide at honeybook.com/Rising Tide, or on social media with either of those handles. And then if you want to connect personally, you can also do that at Natalie Franke on Instagram is a great place to go. Or even if you have questions about anything we talked today, from the business side of things to the meetups, to where to find one in your city, how to get plugged in and connected, where to find these resources we've talked about, I'm an open book and I'm always available to you. Just throw a DM in there and I'll get back to you quickly on Instagram.
It's been so awesome talking to you. You truly are. It's easy to talk to you too. I remember the first time I met you and I was nervous. I was totally fangirling at the time also, and nervous, and all these other feels. And you just made it so easy. And I love that. I love the humility that you bring to the table.
Well, thank you.
So,
This was such an incredible time together, an interview. And I'm so honored and so grateful that you asked for me to come on, and thank you. And I cannot wait for this episode to go live, and we'll just be cheering you on.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining Law Chat with Girija. I love these kind of stories and conversations where we can be real, honest, and open, and having fun at the same time. I hope you are inspired and motivated to keep doing the amazing work you are doing. If this is something that gave you all those feels and then some, truly motivated and inspired for you, you can show your love in all or one of these ways. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this video with your community and tell them about it, or share with somebody that can benefit from it. I look forward to seeing you next time on another episode of Law Chat, and until then, keep moving forward. Bye.